Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of a Mobey Forum special webinar, where we have pulled together some excellent speakers to discuss and debate some of the hot topics of this time. In true Mobey Forum, it will be a quite open and informal discussion, and I hope you will find this useful. Before introducing today's panel, I'll just say a few words about Mobey Forum. Mobey Forum is an industry organization that was founded in 2000. It has, since its inception, been driven mainly by banks, but also technology providers and other relevant players have found their way to Mobey, all seeking out this special relationship, this Mobey family, as we often hear described. And it has always been a place where the members have come to have the most burning, most relevant, most interesting dialogues, questions answered, and strategies challenged, etc. Mobey is a members-only organization, so most of Mobey's events are held under the Chatham House rules, so only few things get out of those, but from time to time we do have these more public events like this webinar, so hopefully it can give you an idea of how things happen in Mobey, and hopefully also that you would consider at some point joining. So I would very much like to introduce today's panel. I'm very, very proud and happy to have such a distinguished panel of Mobey Forum veterans. All are active participants in the expert groups that are currently running in Mobey. So first of all, we have Amir Tabaković. Amir is the CEO and founder of experiens.ai, currently working as an executive for business development with mostly AI. He's also a guest professor and a lecturer on AI and machine learning at a number of universities. He's been the chair of many a work group and expert group in Mobey. Currently, he's chairing Mobey Forum's AI and data security expert group. Amir is based in Barcelona, but has lived most of his life in Switzerland. The reason for me to include the geography this time around is that since we'll be discussing the coronavirus and how that has impacted financial services, I think it's relevant to also have the geographical dimension included as well. Next to Amir, we have Jukka Yliuntinen from Giesecke+Devrient, where he is a vice president for digital solutions. Jukka is a Mobey Forum board member and also a co-chair of Mobey Forum's digital ID expert group, and Jukka is based in Helsinki, Finland. I'm also happy to include Mario Brkić, who is a product owner at George Lab, part of the Erste group. George Lab is Erste's innovation platform for open banking. Mario has also been an active participant in Mobey for quite a while, and he's now currently the co-chair of Mobey Forum's open banking expert group. And Mario is based in Vienna, Austria. And last and probably least in such a fine company, it's me. My name is Kristian Sørensen. I'm a co-founder of Norfico and strategic advisor to banks and technology providers on payments and emerging financial services. I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I've been involved in Mobey Forum for many years, representing different companies as members. So without further ado, let us say hello to our panel. And the first quick question I would like to ask Amir, you've been in Mobey for a long time. Can you just say a couple of words about how you have benefited as a Mobey member?
Sure, Kristian, thanks. As you mentioned, Mobey Forum is something like a family to me because I joined 10 years ago and I could benefit from Mobey Forum on the professional side, but also being able to meet with people who share same interest and same passion for digital financial services.
Excellent. And what about you, Jukka? Just a few lines on your benefit from Mobey.
Thank you, Kristian. So, well, very much echo you and Amir. So it is a very kind of a family type of organization, so that you actually share information very openly, which is very different to any other organization or conferences or industry bodies that at least I have never participated. So, and that of course gives you many benefits. One of them is that you really get to the roots of the knowledge, and then secondly, you get to know really people who are expert on their domains, and by the way, they are really also very nice people.
Good to hear, Jukka. And Mario, representing a bank into the Mobey Forum, just a few words from you as well. What is the benefit that you as a person and the bank you represent gets from your Mobey membership?
So I can only agree with my esteemed colleagues. I think there's a very tight-knit group in Mobey. And what we specifically get is, it's a group of people that you can also ask in confidentiality, in like a secure environment, how they're dealing with some of the issues that you're dealing with, and actually expect to get a meaningful response. Whereas usually there's a lot of this kind of a competitive atmosphere, let's say, where people, even if they're dealing with some issues, don't want to maybe admit it or get into the details, or they don't want to actually actively help you solve them. Whereas in Mobey, that's not the case. You don't really feel that type of energy. It's more of a, let's come to a common way of solving the problems better when we're dealing with on both sides. So for me, it's definitely a big benefit.
Thank you, all three of you. I can only concur to what have been brought up. And as you said, Mario, we are talking about the things that matter. And of course, a big thing that matters to all of us right now is the current situation brought on by COVID-19. And that has, of course, changed the world completely, both the way that business conduct themselves, the way we pay, the way we interact, the way we do all sorts of things, but also the way we work. So perhaps starting out on the working from home and how the three of you have coped with that, and the organizations that you're working with, how do they cope with that? What has been easy? What has been a challenge? So maybe again, starting with you, Amir, you live and work under perhaps the strongest lockdown of us all in Barcelona. How is working from home in Barcelona these days?
Yeah, it's challenging, but first of all, being able to work from home is actually a privilege, and I'm grateful that staying inside is an option for me, because our challenges are minor in comparison with someone working in the emergency room, for example, like my brother, so the problems like, can my broadband internet connection at home support 4 web meetings running in parallel, or which rules to apply when both of my kids have to share one laptop? This is actually not a huge challenge. But in my case, I'm used to working from home. The one challenge is lack of social contact, especially when the world is falling apart. As you mentioned, I'm right now supporting mostly AI and in business development, and they introduced things like, for example, 30 minutes coffee meetings in group of 3, or weekly workouts where you were doing, physical exercises via Zoom. So that's something very positive. And talking about the situation in Barcelona, it was a very challenging weeks. Many people dying, the health system breaking apart, but right now the situation is improving. So I hope that this trend will continue.
Thanks, Amir. Mario, how is it running a bank from home?
Well, luckily I don't have to run the whole bank. So most of us already have experience with remote working. So I would say kind of my small micro universe was a little bit quicker to adapt, whereas the rest of kind of different departments might have had some more issues. But I think that everybody had a very quick crash course in remote working in the last month. So we've been since already a month and a half now in full home office. And besides the first days when we had kind of just technical issues and getting everybody used to kind of this new collaboration mode, I have to say it's going quite smoothly. Apart from the social aspects, productivity, collaboration, everything is incredibly good. But I have to say that always goes down to the people that you're working with. And if you invest in people who are good at what they do and actually have a team spirit, I think that we were very lucky that we were able to overcome a lot of the challenges. But that being said, it's of course demanding. I'm one of those people that love drawing on whiteboards, so finding virtual whiteboards that can support me has been an ongoing challenge.
Yeah. And Jukka, as you work in very much security related industry. How has it been for you? Have everything been in place, all things being ready to be fully digital and fully remote? How is it working from home in Finland?
Thanks. Well, it's been actually quite easy for myself and actually for my teams, the closest team, what I'm heading, and also to my colleagues, because I have actually the virtual teams, and we are a global company. So from everything from west coast of US all the way to Australia. So people are very used to that one. The time zones are not challenges. The tools are not challenging. Actually, the biggest challenge is that everybody is now online, which means that then you are spending even more time over your laptop and desk than you should probably. But of course, there are, even for us, like a company who also provides services in the financial sector, there are actually major challenges have been, but I think that we have managed them well. For example, from the production. So we have a big production size warehousing in China, actually in the region where this all started. And that started to impact, of course, our businesses from the very beginning of this year. So, and then when you go to the physical world, just like Amir said, so there are many people also in our company who just need to go and be, for example, in the personalization side or production side. And of course, our way of working is much easier and much more safe from that point of view. Just on my close vicinity, well, we do also, for example, some of the very high tech security stuff, which requires, for example, the security certification on the common criteria, which means that you need to actually work and do the development in a very special security areas. And we have, for example, operations in India, and some of our R&D guys, so they cannot go there because there is not just a lockdown, but it's actually curfew. So you cannot travel anywhere, which means that we needed to, for example, have some of the people working and actually living in their office so that they can actually provide the services. So, but yeah, personally, I mean, I'm also a bit relieved because I've been traveling a lot, and this kind of a travel bans, it's kind of a great, at least for a while. But then I also feel the same as some of the colleagues. So you cannot just totally really disregard this kind of social interactions. And of course, we have a lot of customers, but colleagues, and you still miss something. So online cannot actually cover that all.
Yeah, and I think we also should give credit where credit's due. I was impressed to read that the Giesecke+Devrient has actually managed to tweak your plastic card production to create visors for healthcare workers during the time where there is a big need of these plastic visors to keep health personnel safe, that you've been able to take your technology that normally produces plastic cards and produce these pieces of equipment for the healthcare professionals. I think that's good on you to see that kind of innovation coming out of a payments company. So let's pick up further on today's theme of COVID-19. And I briefly tried to hand it to you, Mario, but I want to pick up again. And I mean, even though you are not yourself running the bank from home, but how do you see things in a bank these days? How do the bank engage with its customers? Do you see a growing demand for self-service, or is it other services that bank customers are demanding these days? How is it for a bank during COVID-19?
Yeah, so from our side, I think since we also operate in various geographies, so talking about George being live in Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, and also preparing for launch in other countries. When we look at how our users were reacting to this whole situation, where in most of the countries there was different levels of lockdowns, the digital usage just skyrocketed. So we're able to see this right from the first day of kind of logically those users which would interact with maybe branches, but also just checking some things on ATMs and in other channels. Everything that was remote just exploded. And it was interesting because we do have a lot of the services that you can do remotely. Of course, as a fully digital product, we try to get George to a level where we can do everything digitally. But there were some aspects which we were still kind of rolling out or planning to still enhance in the future. And the remote part, so having different services fully digitalized to just being able to communicate, we actually had to kind of leave some things that we were working on and just fully focus in the most agile way that you can get on seeing what can we do to actually support all the people who are now at home but still want to be able to do their banking business. So we actually were very quick in reacting. We did a few interesting things that were maybe not expected before, or we didn't have a focus on it. So, for example, we were trying to tackle the issue of how can we streamline that a user is already authenticated from the moment that they call the service hotline. So something that in normal times it would have been kind of a nice to have, because usually you have the time and there's always the fallback, being able to have agents ask you certain questions in the most rudimentary way to validate your identity. But we as George then jumped in and said, okay, there is a better way that we can use technologies to solve this, and also streamline when you have hundreds of thousands of calls coming in, having those few minutes to validate if somebody is who they say they are, that doesn't cut it. It's not possible. So everything from that point of view to also just being aware that digital usage, stability of the system, and also the need for some services. So everything that was related to having remote communication was definitely heightened. We had a very big focus on that. We also had to take a step back. So some new features that we wanted to launch, we actually kind of slowed down and pulled back a bit, because we said stability of the system is the most important thing. So we don't want to introduce something new that maybe would have a benefit for sure, but we wanted to actually prioritize that our users can use George in the most stable way that they're used to, and not leave any room for any possible either lessons that they need to learn how to use something new, or just stability of the system. So from different aspects, it was we could see week on week how it was. I'm proud of the team, how they were able to react really quickly, but also just the shift in the needs of the things that we needed to focus on were very tangible, let's say.
Yeah. And I would like to pick up on something you talked about making sure that you probably identify and authenticate the people who or your customers when they contact you. Jukka, I hear from other sources as well that the demand for digital ID and digital signature is going through the roof across Europe and probably across the world. Is that also something that you experience?
Well, I guess kind of a yes, but then at the same time maybe no. And of course that's a bit subjective view, and what we try to do actually in the Mobey Forum too is to get a better global or at least regional view on this one, because we did actually this kind of in our expert group, digital identity, already a survey on the different kind of schemes, or digital identity initiatives, and how they deploy themselves, and where they are on their maturity. And now we follow up and look kind of how this moment of crisis have impacted in the take-up rates. There are some statistics that we can see that it's actually picking up quite nicely. For example, the UK scheme, which has not been that the big thing actually, there is a quite nice uptake, because people are more or less forced to use this service in order to get actually the benefits that they are seeking today. We have seen the same in some of the Nordic countries, that the take-up rate is going even much higher than it used to be, and it's especially the usage, so that the people use the existing digital identity, because there are quite a nice mature systems. But then in many other countries it's not, and of course one of the fundamental is that if you don't have the infrastructure, you cannot put it in place. And even if you would technically be able to do that, digital identity usually is something where there is a regulation, whether it's a local legal regulation, whether it's if there is an issue for the digital identity like banks, or there might be the banking regulation. And actually these things do not just change overnight. So I see that there is a little bit kind of a pros and cons, but at the same time, of course, there is a lot of, let's say, digital identities provided, for example, like Mario said, by the bank. So, I mean, they are digital identities, and people can now use the services much more actively. So it might not be that it's a kind of a digital identity given by the government or being able to enabling different type of services, but at least the banking services, and in many cases, actually, these are credentials which enable other services, and that type of usage is definitely growing. That's what we see. Maybe your other point on the digital signature. So I think that it's even a little bit less mature. So there are digital identity schemes, at least that what we have studied and be more familiar. So usually they are not having that mature digital signature services, but they are being developed. What I have a personal experience is that during the now last month and a half, also working online or only online and using services for different kind of a service providers. So digital signature, I don't know. I used to use digital signature probably during the last year or so, maybe once. Now, during the last 1.5 months, I have done it already 5 times for different purposes, for governmental services actually, but also for the services like or applications like just signing a job contracts like this. So again, I think that this requires a really infrastructure to be in place. It requires that there is a certain regulations in place. So kind of a speed up that by snapping the finger is a bit more challenging. But what is obvious is, of course, that the need for a good trusted digital identity and the capabilities to use for example, a digital signature is absolutely now having a momentum.
I would like to pick up on some of those points maybe a little later, but just a quick question: what is the role that the banks can play in the accelerated rollout of digital ID and digital signatures?
Well, that's a very good question. In my opinion, and what we have also concluded in our expert group, is that the banks have first of all an excellent position to provide this kind of a trusted digital identity, because they have this trusted role in I would say, in any society or country that we all live in. In many countries, actually much more trusted than, for example, law enforcement or police and so forth. So from that point of view, I think that the banks absolutely have the role. And what we see is that, again, the banks are seeking now also how this kind of a capabilities that they have built, how those could be leveraged also by other industries, other service providers, and potentially, if not already used, also by the different kind of a governmental agencies. But again, the challenge comes that you need to have something, you need to solve this kind of a regulatory topics in order this to be done. But again, I see that the banks have now see that there is a momentum, and this is probably one of the quickest way. We have, for example, one of the members from Canada, the TD Bank, and in Canada there is already the national identity scheme and the infrastructure in place, and now what we hear from TD Bank, they are really kind of looking now how and in what applications they should prioritize the implementation of the digital identity.
Yeah, it seems like it's becoming part of the resilience of any country these days, where we are forced to do everything digitally, or as much as possible digitally, that the higher degree of digitization that a country has, the more resilient it is to this current situation. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, I would very much agree with that kind of a conclusion. Yes.
Yeah. But with all of this increased and accelerated digitization, we also see that we of course generate more and more data when we use more and more services digitally. Amir, you being the data expert among us, if we take the positive view on this increased amount of data first, What opportunities does this bring?
Thanks, Christian. Plenty of opportunities. Let me just highlight two. The first one is automation. So efficiency gains by removing human from the loop. So I predict that most of the banks will automate many tasks that today require human labor and are repetitive and are costly. And when I say that, I don't only talk about back office work automation. Where we see the biggest impact is on the highly educated white collar worker side. So if you're a compliance, legal, portfolio management professional, think about the amount of work that you do daily and which is repetitive, and then start questioning yourself, what other more creative activities could you start doing? And the second effect is, I would say, replacing all the expert systems which are in the bank, on the bank side, with much more predictive or prescriptive applications. And this will increase responsiveness and adaptability of your systems. So instead of just relying on hard-coded rules, you will be able to check the input data that you receive and then pick the best rule, best solution for the given case. Also covering the edge cases where usually the banks are not so good at.
Mm-hmm. But this, of course, comes at a price, I assume. I mean, these days we see the number of unemployed people skyrocketing in most countries, and isn't what you're suggesting is will that not just cost more jobs, or can it potentially generate jobs? What is your view on that?
Well, I personally think that many activities which we are doing right now are just not. We are basically we are turned to a machine from the system. So I see this more as a liberation of this repetitive and often boring tasks. In my opinion, we all have to adapt to the fact that on one hand, we will have to become more creative, specialize more on the task where humans are more competitive than the artificial intelligence today. On the other side, the question is if society will really need as many workers in the future as we need today. But that's, I think, a question to the politics. And maybe it will be even nicer if all of us work a bit less.
Yeah, who wouldn't want that? But when we talk about the way that all of you guys are working from home now, and the way that we all probably are using digital services even more, and the way that the bank customers that Mario described use their various digital solutions to engage and interact with the bank, surveillance and that kind of data ethics discussion is bound to pop up. And even though it seems like most of us accept a higher degree of surveillance, we have all these tracking apps for COVID-19 spreading that many of us have installed and accepted to be tracked for various reasons. Is that a good thing in terms of further increasing the adoption of digital services, or is it actually a slippery slope that we should be worried about from a both consumer but also as an employee of a company, that all of a sudden can measure, am I following the Zoom meeting or not? What is your thought?
Am I following the Zoom meeting, or is Zoom meeting following me? That's the question. No, I mean, it's a good question, because I was talking about opportunities first, but there are challenges. And I see data privacy and machine learning fairness as two of the big data related challenges the banks are facing right now. On the one hand, banks need to innovate using AI technology, and they have to become data driven. And on the other side, the trust is banks' biggest asset. And by using, sharing, monetizing your customers' data, there are big risks involved, not only on the legal side, but also when it comes to trust of the customer. And so one example is, for example, machine learning fairness, just to stress one. So at one point, we were not trusting the decision of a machine. And now I have an impression that the pendulum is swinging in the other way. So now we are starting maybe not being too critical about the decision of artificial intelligence. And that's I think a challenge. We have to remain skeptical. And when it comes to surveillance, I mean, it's good to be paranoid. I would like to paraphrase Nicholas Nassim Taleb. He says, it's the paranoid can be wrong 1,000 times, but if you're not paranoid and you're wrong only once, this can have terrible outcome. And we as a customer, we are on the weaker side. There is this asymmetry of power problem, and as long as you're on the weaker side, you should always remain paranoid.
Yeah. I would like to just quickly ask you, Jukka. I mean, from you also very much involved in the whole security space. Do you see that the increased amount of data and the increased sensitivity of the data that we generate and share, that comes with demand for increased security?
Yes, so that would be the very simple answer. So, of course, I mean, we live in the different type of worlds compared to what kind of a society structure, governmental structure, what do people trust, what do they not trust. So there are, of course, these countries, for example, in Asia, Singapore, China, where you have, for example, the applications like you mentioned, this kind of a corona detection apps, or however we call them, being quite widely adopted, and people probably do not have that many concerns because the adoption rates are, I would say, relatively high, although not everybody is using them. Then comparing those in Europe, so there is a lot of skepticism, and this comes especially from the point of data privacy. That on what conditions, first of all, I give something, and then who can track. And I'm not even saying that the track of the data, but who has developed these apps, who can have maybe the backdoor to the app, and all kind of things. And because these modern technology is basically invisible, or it makes actually the underlying capabilities invisible for the consumer. So you just have an app and okay, I put some information, but what does, for example, the platform like a mobile operating system actually collects, not to mention even the app. There is a lot of things, and this is a big challenge. I think that then maybe I'm one of these guys, like Amir said, being very paranoid. And I'm always a skeptic on this, and I like that there is a very strong emphasis on the data privacy. But at the same time, I mean, I live myself in Finland, in the one of the Nordic countries. They say that we should be the happiest country in the world, but even here you can see that when actually people were asked to balance basically the health and the data privacy, so health actually was much more important. So people are willing to give away some of the data privacy in order to get, for example, the better position on the healthcare, whatever that means. Could be on the this kind of tracking apps, which are also planned to be introduced in Finland.
Yeah. And Mario, from a banking perspective, the way that you work with data, or the way that the bank customers expect you to work with their data, have you felt any changes as a result of COVID-19?
I was very eager to hear the answers from the two colleagues, but actually, no, I don't think that we would we would have a different approach or different strategy in like a pre-COVID time and now, because it's one of the things that simply we need to take seriously regardless of the circumstances. The only thing that has changed and what's a little bit more sensitive is just being aware that now we have many users who are actually using the digital services who are not maybe digital natives. So, there's always the population of users who are the traditional active users. And in times like these, when people are simply forced to do some things remote, what that they would have done maybe offline or using some other channels. So there are users who are simply a little bit more, I don't know whether we should call it paranoid or just not used to digital channels. And we have to just be aware that we have users who are also maybe a bit more sensitive to these things, and just to keep that in mind. But for me, it's also like, from a design point of view, it's also a really incredible time to also be able to see, especially those users, how they're using your product. So it's something that's like, let's call it the type of usability test, where you can see, okay, are the users who haven't been the traditional active users up to now, did you build something well enough that it actually works as it should, that they understand how it should work? And also, I would apply the same thing for your data privacy issues. So if those users who are not used to it and maybe all have some special concerns, was the data privacy policy and the way that you were treating things up to now, does this also give them a peace of mind? Do they still also have faith and the trust? Because I would be a bit wary if somebody said, oh, well, now just because this situation came up, now we have to drastically change our approach, which would signal that something wasn't being really done properly in the former times, let's call it that.
But from a product development point of view, is the increased digitization and the increased amount of data something that you can leverage to create and develop even better products for the consumers?
I think that this will also give us more of a kind of a more focus on developing tools that can help users manage their finances remotely. So when I say remotely, I mean like anything where they can do it either on their own, fully without support from anybody, whether online or some sort of a digital support, just because that gives them more options. So if you're only limited to actually having to sit down and ask your advisor, what should I do, or what does this mean for me? If that's their only choice, then you're limited. You don't have the possibility to actually sit down and take a look at, in our example of like, what does George show me about my finances? What is something that is flagged that I should look at a little bit more closely? What are the suggestions? Because if you have that, you can always say, well, I'm not sure about that, and I still want to go back to sit with my advisor or call somebody or discuss it with a friend. But I think I'm all for giving users options. I'm not for forcing decisions on them. I don't think that's ever our role. But I think that digital and kind of this whole data-driven banking is something that is there to give people a better insight, give them options, give them a different kind of a viewpoint, or highlight things that maybe the data shows which wouldn't be obvious for them. So I think that even these situations, they can just give us a little bit more of a concentration and a push forward to just continue the way that we've all started.
Picking up on the whole data-driven approach to things, if we take a step back, across many countries, we've seen, in my perspective, somewhat strange distaste for fact and science amongst politicians and even leaders of certain countries. But with COVID-19, we see that especially the countries that seem to handle the situation best, all of a sudden the experts have been pushed to the very front of the communications to the public, and also that the politicians base their decisions all of a sudden on data, on facts, on modeling, on data. And Amir, do you see that this data-driven design and development that I know that you, for one, has been advocating for a long time, has governments all of a sudden overtaken private companies and banks in terms of actually basing their strategy on data?
If they are right now in front, it's difficult to say, but they were faced with a crisis. The governments were faced with a crisis, and the COVID-19, the whole crisis, pushes you to a space where the outcome of every decision that you make becomes very quickly visible. And just imagine if you would compare this to banking, if any decision that you make as on different hierarchical levels would become visible in 15 days, I'm sure that more banks would become data-driven themselves.
What are your thoughts on that, Mario?
I can only agree with Amir. Even though I would say that the industry is evolving, not all banks are equal. Some are very much some would have objection to that and say, no, we need to improve it. And some would say, well, that's fine because they're just, they're used to a different way of working. So I wouldn't generalize it.
I would like to just take a slight turn on the data discussion, because some part of the data that we store with our banks today is indeed sensitive. My bank knows quite a lot about me. In this new reality, or this new normal based on COVID-19, we might well find ourselves in a situation where we need to also be able to document and store our immunity status or infection status. And one thing is to store that information, but another thing is to make it available for validation as you engage in society. Jukka, you are very much used to handling and distributing credentials in a safe and secure manner. Do you see a role for the banks to actually be the ones that help store and distribute, store, and maybe even validate sort of immunity certificates or something similar that might come in handy as we start to return to normal life?
Right. Good question again. So I would like to think that this type of information, which is very, let's say, sensitive information, and there is a lot of sensitive information, of course, existing already, and they are in a different type of databases typically. Some of them are decentralized, and then if they are decentralized, so you could have some sort of a form factor, whether it's a card or something else, could be your mobile phone, where you store it, and there are, of course, technologies to secure it. But as I started, so I think that what I see this, and what I see also for kind of probably the optimal way to manage is that there is information, for example, collected on us, and this could be the kind of whether we are immune, whether we have had already the, for example, the coronavirus, and we have then created the immunity for that one. That is typically already in some sort of a database, and what I would like to advocate is that there is then actually just a strong identity created somewhere, which then enable myself, but also others to actually check whether that information in some databases is there, whether it's a correct, authentic, and then the people using this kind of a strong identity, and then the use cases like authenticating themselves, whether it's a governmental office, healthcare office, whether it's then some service, let's say private service provider, they can have that information there, and it could be digitally signed and all that. So, and then in this respect, I believe again that the banks have an excellent opportunity to be part to create this digital identity and infrastructure and provide elements there. Because what we hear now also in this discussion, banks have this trust, and that's a very unique, let's say, factor that not many even governmental agencies always have. And if you really foster this one, there is a possibility really to bring this to the game. So I kind of like to see this more like a way that there is a really strong identity established, rather than then trying to distribute this information everywhere and then create a separate infrastructure for that, because then there is a cost for that one. Any kind of a device that you deliver and distribute, there is a cost, rather than you have a one-way identifying yourself to somewhere like a database and then using. And knowing also that there are a lot of different opinions on this kind of that you centralize everything, but at the same time looking the world that we are living, so most of the people we have given our almost kind of a whole life to the Facebooks and the like. So I tend to believe that that shouldn't be finally the problem.
No. But I mean, for me, it sounds pretty much like some of the same things that we have been discussing in the payments industry for years and years, making sure that we have security, interoperability, acceptance, and all of that in place. So for instance, assuming that we will not have a definitive cure vaccine in place, but assuming that I need to document my status before getting on a plane to fly somewhere. And of course, the same way going back, so that I know that if I fly from Copenhagen to Sydney, that I can get on the plane in Sydney again because I can authenticate my COVID-19 status before being led into Australia. Is that a role that the banks and the bank and payment infrastructure could help solve? Do you see that, Jukka, as something that we could do on the rails that we already have in place?
Well, I think that yes, bank can play a role. Just taking the example of this kind of a COVID, that are you allowed to take a plane because you don't have you can get the infection anytime. So which means that you need to be pretty much online capable, which means that, for example, whatever device would prove this needs to kind of collect this information almost online. Of course, nothing can be fully online because they cannot detect all the time that did you got the virus. But if you were checked, for example, 2 days ago, you might have still a 2-day time to get the infection, and how can you prove it? So again, best is that there is probably some sort of online capabilities, and then whether you store really something in a device which you carry, whatever form factor, or whether it's in a database. So you need to have this kind of a online connectivity. So that's one of the aspects. And there, of course, again, banks would have an excellent opportunity. So if it's, for example, your banking app, it's your mobile wallet provided by the bank, or it could be, of course, related to your payment card as an example, because you kind of carry your identity with your payment card. And this could be connected then to certain kind of information. So I think that the banks have an opportunity really to use the infrastructure that they have created, because it's a global network for the payment, and riding the same rails. For example, thinking that you could basically, like nowadays, the digital cards, they are using the tokenization technology. And why not you actually tokenize for example, some other data? It doesn't need to be the card data, your payment, but it could be other data, and data could be identity. Of course, do you want to then associate that to certain use case, like this kind of a virus detection could be? But I think that, again, from the infrastructure point of view and cost point of view, and probably kind of a data privacy point of view, again, is that if you would have riding those rails, providing, for example, tokenized identity, you could use then the same rails, but now in a very kind of a streamlined way and processes. So I think yes, the answer, but then how to exactly do so, there needs to be probably still brain work done.
Yeah, I mean, Amir, you've spent several years of your life, I know, looking at mobile wallets. Do you see this as an ideal use case for a mobile wallet?
Actually, I do, although, I'm a bit skeptical about this kind of certificates in general, because in this point, I start asking myself, how would you really implement this? Would this be opt-in, or would you be forced to do it? And then if you open this door, this Pandora's box here, what would be the next certificate that you would have to carry in your mobile wallet?
And Mario, do you follow these ethical concerns from Amir in terms of the services that you deliver to your consumers?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, especially this last one. So where's the border? And I think that we need to look at it from a little bit of a broader perspective, for sure. Just to add to that, it's that we have this trust, and I think that we need to be very careful that we don't compromise it in any way. That we don't be seen as we are just a tool that is being used by maybe some other participants in society that maybe would not adhere to such a strict level of ethics, let's call them. So the bank has built up this trust for a reason, and we need to also have our own point of view and be a little bit critical about the implications of the tools that we provide.
I think it's been very, very interesting and very excellent input from all of you. Maybe just to wrap up, also in interest of time, I would like to take a brief round and hear each of you the main takeaways and learnings that you have faced as part of this somewhat tragic situation, but also something that has created a new normal that we need to adapt to. So maybe Jukka, kicking off on what are the main takeaways that you see coming out of this COVID-19 situation?
Right. So I think that we are really living this experiment ourselves. So we are part of the rats in the cage in a way. So, and there is of course a lot of learnings already in this crash course. So if you look maybe not just taking a banking example, but for example, the school side and education. So really most of the countries probably needed to do in a kind of a couple of days and go online education really in a very short time frame. And if you look now the outcomes, so people seem to be pretty okay with that, both from the teachers and the students. And banking is maybe a bit different because in many countries we are already very much, let's say, online. So my takeaway on this one is that there is a really ways to improve our societies and services using the digital solutions rather easily from the technical point of view, but and this has been always my statement. So please solve the other things like regulatory, social aspects, behavioral aspects first. Technology-wise, you can do almost anything, and I think that this is one of the proof points here. The other thing which I would like to also emphasize when we look from the banking point of view is exactly what we discussed here in the latter part is the trust. So you shouldn't compromise the trust because there is a now opportunity maybe to do quickly something. So it's good that you take things like, just like Mario said, something which is proven, which is stable, run that one, and then try to, of course, implement new services, features gradually once you are sure that they work, because that's the really fundamental, that if people get having this kind of a bad experiences, so then it's very difficult to get them on board another time. And of course, then in relation to the trust for the banks, also the data privacy. So please cherish that one as much as you can, because then on that you can really try again build the businesses for the future.
Thanks, Jukka. And Mario, assuming that you do not disagree too much with Jukka on these statements, besides from what Jukka highlights here, what is the biggest takeaways and learnings that you will bring with you based on this current situation?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Jukka. And maybe I just add a few different ones. So one, let's start from like remote working, since we're doing the podcast. Remote, of course. So I'm incredibly proud also of just my team and in general seeing how well collaboration works remote. So I've had a lot of situations where I was personally working with a partially remote team, but as those who know me, I'm a very much of a people person. So as I said, grabbing a marker and writing on a whiteboard is something that is just like, that's a normal part of my day. But being able to see how different people can react and work really well collaboratively in remote working, that's my big positive from this whole crisis, where definitely the way of working will not be the same in the future. That's one part. Second part, users or customers, however we want to label them. So it was a very good motivation for everybody to use contactless payments. I have to say, something we don't think about that much, but now, everybody from merchants to consumers, everybody's looking at how can we pay without actually exchanging any money or handing over cards. So contactless payments will definitely come out of this as a winner. Also, just shops, like seeing the difference and the significance of having an online presence for many merchants is also, a big takeaway. I think that people who are a little bit skeptical and saying, well, I still got my shop and I can rely on people coming in, that's definitely not the case. And also for me, the last days, I've definitely been thinking a lot about just how we can support SMEs. So also, in George, we're also building up a group of services specifically targeted for SMEs. And for me, when I see kind of the whole aftermath of Corona and looking at how SMEs and, small enterprises have been definitely the ones who have been hit the hardest, we need to all find different ways and just give them as many tools as we can to help them recover from all of this. So kind of three completely different aspects, but for me, really interesting and at least positive things that we can take into the future.
Yeah. And Amir, and just for everybody, Amir has also spent a good part of his professional life working for a bank. So I would also very much like to hear your thoughts and perspective on what will you personally, but also what should banks take away from this current situation?
Well, Personally, I discovered that I think for years, my behavior when I was using financial services was kind of very in line with what is right now happening with COVID-19. I never wanted to have a direct interaction with human, even without the face mask. I was always asking myself, why should I visit the branch? Why should I sit in this chair and watch this banking clerk giving a call to another banking clerk, asking something? And I hope that this crisis will be seen as opportunities not to go back, and all these advances that we did kind of, with some push from behind in the direction of reducing friction for our customers. Let's keep all these gains and let us not go back there.
I think this is all very excellent advice and observations from all three of you, and I can only conclude by saying that this accelerated digitization that we see across the board is certainly something that I also see as positive for the most part. It's something that will bring businesses, including banks, many new opportunities for improving the services that they deliver to consumers. I also agree that there are certain things that we will not go back to after this. But of course, with all the new opportunities comes certain reflections, certain pitfalls that you should consider. And I think that the conversation that we just had has been very good at highlighting some of these potential pitfalls. And for those of you listening, I hope that you saw this as a good example of a quality dialogue that hopefully sparked some ideas or raised some concerns with yourself. And this is what we do in Mobey Forum. It is open, honest discussions. We're not afraid to admit when there's something we don't know. We're not afraid to admit when something goes wrong. And this makes for much more interesting conversations. This is the first time we do this format, so we hope that you've enjoyed it. And we are also looking to have future editions in the same format if there's an interest for that. If you have any questions, topics that you would like to see discussed, please share them on Twitter using the hashtag AskMobey, or you can send them via email to mobeyforum@mobeyforum.org. And feel free if you want to be anonymous. We will, of course, not distribute the origin of a question if we do a future edition of a panel like this and take up your specific question. So we hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we welcome you to follow what else Mobey is doing. We have a lot of different interesting content coming out, so keep your eyes on mobeyforum.org or follow us on Twitter. Have a nice day. Thank you.